Welcome to Keep It Electric with Tremayne Person, episode 57. Today's recording is happening on Friday, October 4th. We're going to talk briefly about the Detroit Tigers' surprising season. Very brief, because this is a Mariners show, don't get it confused. But we will touch briefly on the Tigers and how they've managed to make a push that honestly most of us didn't see coming. We'll also revisit an episode from earlier in the season where I predicted how all the divisions would shake out across Major League Baseball. Let's just say I was off on quite a few of those. We'll talk about what went differently or how things shaped differently than expected. Lastly, we're going to address the recent comments from Mariners GM President of Baseball Operations Jerry Dipoto, and team owner John Stanton as they reflect on the season that just wrapped up. There's been a lot of talk about what's next for the Mariners, and we'll dive into that, offering some thoughts on what the front office might be planning going forward. Let's jump in. All right, yes, so I want to start this episode off talking about the Detroit Tigers. Yes, we're mostly focused on the Seattle Mariners, and don't worry, we're going to get to that, but I've got to talk about the Tigers because that's a real story this postseason. And usually, if the Mariners aren't involved, I'm not glued to the screen like this, but this year I just couldn't look away. And I think a lot of you can probably relate to this. It reminded me of how special postseason baseball really is. There's something about the atmosphere, the intensity, and the unpredictability. I don't really need to be reminded about how much I can't stand the Houston Astros. It never gets old seeing them lose. But the biggest takeaway for me right now is definitely envy. It's painful to watch other teams enjoy October magic while we in Seattle are left on the outside looking in. We're starving for that feeling, for meaningful playoff baseball, and it's obvious that the fans here are very desperate for it. We're getting angry. But let's get to what really blew my mind. The Detroit Tigers. The Tigers. They have a 26-man wildcard playoff roster worth $18.8 million. That's less than what the Astros paid their relief pitcher, Josh Hader. He earns $19 million a year. The Tigers beat them. Matter of fact, they blew a game open hitting against Hader. It's just wild. So wrap your head around that for a second. A team that's spending peanuts compared to the Astros managed to knock them out. And a lot of the credit goes to what they call pitching chaos. Now, I've talked about this before, the Tigers' strategy of using an opening pitcher, switching arms constantly. They're playing matchups to death. They've dubbed it pitching chaos. And I gotta say that it's effective. But is it fun to watch? No. General consensus among my peers and a lot of baseball fans is that it's kind of an annoying style of play, and I have to agree. Normally, I love to see the Astros lose in any fashion, but watching them fall to this type of strategy was somehow less satisfying. Now, here's my take. I actually think the Tigers might be bad for baseball right now, especially if this is the direction they continue to go down. I think it cheapens the game a bit. Now, sure, they beat the Astros, and that's a win for anyone who hates the Astros, but if teams start leaning into this strategy, it's going to take something away from the sport. It's one thing if Detroit turns around and spends money in the offseason to build a real contender. I'd respect that. But if this is how they plan to keep competing, then we might see more teams adopt this chaotic approach, and I don't think that's a good thing. Now, hence, that's why MLB's proposal about having a starter go 6 innings is to prevent this exact strategy from taking place. Especially for teams like the Mariners who already struggle with spending, if this strategy becomes a trend, it might work against smaller market teams or mid-market teams who are reluctant to spend. So I don't really want to see much of this anymore. Now, I'll give Detroit their credit. They knocked out the Astros, and I think their approach could even work against a team like the Guardians. But let's be real. There's no way this strategy is beating the Yankees. I just don't see it. But at least for now, we can all breathe a sigh of relief that we won't have to watch the Astros in the ALCS for the 8th straight season. For that, Tigers, I salute you. But is this sustainable? Is this good for baseball? I'm not so sure. All right, so I don't know if I want to call this next segment fun. I would like to say that it's me holding myself accountable. So at the beginning of the baseball season, I made some predictions that didn't exactly age like fine wine. This segment is going to be me coming clean about the ways I completely botched my predictions. So let's start off with the National League, where I was wrong, but honestly not as wrong as I was with the American League. The National League East, I had the Braves winning the division. The Phillies and the Mets finishing second and third, respectively. Now, I don't really want to talk about the bottom feeders in any of these divisions because let's face it, we're only concerned about who made the playoffs. I was actually right about the Braves making the playoffs, but not about them winning the division. And it kind of just continued to get messy from there. I will say that I think the Braves would have had a better shot if they didn't lose their ace and their like MVP in the same season. So, they kind of limited to the playoffs, but like props to them for even making it there in the first place. Moving on to the NL Central, I actually had the Reds as a surprise division winner. That was bold. The Brewers, I had them in second. Turns out the Brewers flipped the script and won the division. I think this is like their third or fourth straight time or season. I had a lot of faith in Cincinnati, and maybe I should going forward. They just hired Terry Francona, but this season I was incorrect. In the NL West, I predicted the Dodgers. That was low hanging fruit. Um, the other predictions in that division, I had the Diamondbacks finishing second and the Giants as a surprise in third. The Padres, I actually didn't believe in them at all. I had them slide in fourth, and that did not work in my favor. They ended up making the playoffs. So the wild cards, I ended up having the Phillies, Diamondbacks, and Brewers. I was wrong on all three. They ended up being the Braves, the Padres, and the Mets. Four of the six teams I predicted for the playoffs, though, they still made it to the postseason. So let's just call that like a small victory, even though some of them were low hanging fruit. Moving on to the American League, that was just bad. I actually predicted all the winners to be wrong. So in the AL East, I had the Baby Birds winning, the Orioles winning the AL East with the Yankees in second. I thought the Baby Birds were ready to take the crown this year, but the Yankees made some moves. They took first place. The Orioles were the runners up. The only slot I predicted correctly in the AL East was for the Rays to finish fourth, and they did. I don't think that's a win at all. I was just completely wrong. For the AL Central, I actually had the Kansas City Royals winning the division. That did not happen, but they did really turn that franchise around. They ended up making the playoffs. I also predicted that the Tigers would finish second, which was ambitious. They ended up making the playoffs as well. I had the Twins in third, the Guardians in fourth, which I was dead wrong. The Guardians won the division. I think they had the second best record in the American League. The AL West, also, just so very wrong. I had three teams from the AL West making the playoffs. That was just plain wrong. I predicted the Mariners would finally win the division, the Astros in second, and the Rangers in third. I really believed that this was the year that Seattle was going to take the crown. I had no faith in the Angels or the A's. Nobody should. I actually said that they would be separated by 6 games at the end of the year. They were, but the difference was I had the A's in last and the Angels in fourth. The A's actually were better than the Angels, and somehow that is just, I don't know, that's just fascinating to me. The wildcard predictions, I had the Yankees, the Astros, and the Rangers locked in. And it ended up being the Orioles, Royals, and Tigers. So my AL playoff picture was a complete mess. But when it comes to the postseason teams in general, I did get 8 out of 12. I got 4 out of 6 in both leagues. The order was completely out of whack. It's fun to look back and almost cringe at the picks, but I'm hoping that after watching so much baseball this season, I'll get a little closer next year. I'll give myself a pat on the back for seeing the Royals and the Tigers as dark horses, though that still didn't really end up as expected. I also, I tried to say that the Mariners would win without any bias, and I'm sticking with my faith in the Mariners. Hopefully next season, I'll make some predictions that won't leave me looking like I'm just throwing darts. Here's a topic that might sting a bit, depending on which side you're on. Seby Zavala. So the news broke out that he's elected to become a free agent this offseason, and honestly, it's not really a shocker. Zavala didn't exactly make an impact during his time in Seattle. The opportunities were few and far between, with Kyle Raleigh solidified as our go-to catcher. Mitch Garver also taking on a bit of that role this season. Zavala wasn't a big part of the equation, and quite frankly, he won't be missed. But that's not where the real issue lies. The irony here is that Zavala wasn't just some random acquisition. He was part of the salary dump trade that sent Gino to Arizona. Along with Zavala, we picked up a reliever named Carlos Vargas, who he never even sniffed the Major League roster this year. So what did we get out of this deal? We got a guy who hit 154 with 1 home run and 2 ribbies all season. He had 1 good game in Colorado. Meanwhile, Suarez, who many fans were sorry to see go, had a much more productive year. 30 home runs, drove in 101 ribbies for the Diamondbacks. Just let that sink in. Now, he's in a hitter-friendly ballpark, but still. Imagine if the Mariners could have, imagine what they would have looked like even if they had just half of that production this season. Our offense was a complete disaster for long stretches. Suarez's absent, it felt like a massive hole in the lineup. So I wouldn't say that we gambled for that trade. We took a risk. We were hoping to dump salary, which is what we accomplished, but maybe getting something out of Zavala, that could have been a little bit of a win, but we actually ended up losing on both fronts. The irony here is almost poetic. The guy we dumped to save money ended up thriving elsewhere, and the player we got in return barely made a dent. What's the over-under that Zavala goes somewhere else and catches fire? We end up watching him have a solid year while we're stuck back at square one. It just goes that way sometimes. You let a player go, and then they flourish the minute they're out of Seattle. We've seen it before. I don't think we're going to see it again with Zavala, though. I just don't see it. At the end of the day, this move didn't work out for the Mariners at all. Best of luck to Zavala, but I'm not going to lose sleep over his departure. What's harder to swallow is the missed opportunity and the fact that we essentially got nothing from that trade. All right, let's get into the Dipoto and Stanton comments. This is kind of the same thing we kind of look out for the last couple seasons. The words from Mariners front office figures like Jerry Dipoto and John Stanton year after year about falling short. It's no surprise at all that the fans are eager to hear what the organization plans to do to improve, because clearly the roster as it stands isn't enough. That's just the reality. But also no surprise, every time these guys get in front of a microphone, it feels like they just end up pissing everyone off. Fans want to hear about bold changes, and instead, we get cautious, conservative answers. I get it. I feel that frustration too, but at the same time, I think I've got a slightly different take on some of the things that they've said. Now look, I would love to see the Mariners dive deep into free agency and spend big. I absolutely would, but I also get that there's risk in throwing money around. It's easy to look at the Robinson Cano contract and feel burned, and I know people are going to say that's old news, but that's still relevant. Stanton has said himself, he still has scars from the deal. That deal, that it still lingers for him. So I think, yeah, that's a bit dramatic, but it's not wrong to be cautious about sinking tons of cash into a player. They've got a point. Overspending on the wrong guy could leave us stuck for years, and when they say their payroll will increase, let's be real, it's increasing because of Julio Rodriguez and other key players that are getting ready to hit arbitration. We're going to pay to keep the talent that we've developed. So where does that leave us? Dipoto made it clear. He's happy with the outfield. And honestly, I am too. Julio is a star in the making. We've got power with Luke Raley. Randy Rosarina is electric. Victor Robles has been electric. Our pitching, best in the league, no question. Cal Raleigh, he's a set it and forget it behind the plate. So we've got the core. The issue, and it's glaringly obvious, every position I just named except our infield. Our infield is a complete mess. Now, J.P. Crawford, he had a down year, but I actually believe that his down year was an outlier. I think he'll bounce back. Second base, we've got a problem. Third base, we've got a problem. I mean, ever since Gino left, we've had a problem there. We're still figuring that out. Rojas has been serviceable. I'll give him that. But then there's first base. And even Dipoto admitted that's where we've got a real issue. And reading between the lines, it tells me that Tyler Locklear is not ready yet. If you don't know Tyler Locklear, he was our second round draft pick in 2023. Now, what do? We need a big bat in the lineup, especially at first base. I'm not talking about bargain shopping for mid-level players. And, we have a question mark about Justin Turner. He's already announced that he wants to continue playing in 2025. But if he does, I'm not sure it will be for the Mariners. So maybe that's where we should talk about free agent spending. Maybe that's where we go all in. Pete Alonso. I think he could be a really big answer at first base. He's set to be a free agent. Maybe even trading for Vladdy Jr. Apparently, we did make a call, and we were actually down to move some prospects, but things just didn't work out. I think we're a cleanup hitter away from making a real playoff push. We've seen the pitching carry this team, but that can't be the whole story. Adding a true power bat could honestly change everything. I really think we actually might be one bat away at this point. What I did appreciate from Dipoto is that they're looking at players in the farm system to possibly contribute next year, and I think that is huge. For too long, we've seen the Mariners develop talent just to trade them away for guys who don't really deliver. I'm kind of tired of watching that. I've made it very clear in episodes in the past. I'm tired of watching us acquire mid-tier players and have them come underperform while our farm system gems get shipped off. It's time to see what the homegrown hitters can actually do if they're giving a real shot. And if they perform, they'll command serious money, but there'll be money that we'll need because we have to keep our core intact, and there'll be money that we should have. So on a side note, I was glad to hear about how much they want Edgar Martinez to stay involved. Even if he's not traveling with the team, having him work with the hitters, especially at home games, would be a huge asset. Edgar is a Mariners legend, and if he can help this offense continue to click, I'm all for it. They've been raving about him ever since he's joined the staff. So I do have some frustration here, and it lies with Dipoto and Stanton. Here's where it really comes in. Sometimes I'm really not sure if they actually believe the words that are coming out of their mouth, or if they're just really getting better at PR. This is a business, and sports franchises are more corporate than ever, so I get that, but I can't always tell if they're actually connected to reality. We'll know soon enough when they start making offseason moves. This is going to be a super interesting offseason, no question. They've got arbitration to deal with. They're figuring out if they're sticking with Root Sports or going to move to getting support from the MLB network. The finances are clearly complicated, but we do know one thing. They're making money. This is the most profitable time in Mariners history, so the funds are there. It's just a matter of how they choose to spend it. There's a lot to figure out, but if you're like me, you're along for the ride. Next week, we'll dive into the players I think will stick around and who I expect to see break out in 2025. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Keep It Electric, and as always, go Mariners!